Testing, testing. Testing, testing. Testing, testing. Testing. Are we speaking of?
Yeah. Yeah, it's coming through. I mean, you. Oh, hello? 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 A, B, C, D, E, F, G.
Welcome. We've jumped a whole generation of technology in the last few months. So hopefully this goes well. My name's Nate Howard. I'm the Executive Director of the Muncie Land Bank. Thank you for coming. This is called our First Friday Property Abandonment and Housing Development Meeting. We've been doing this since October of 2023, and this is a space where we bring in speakers, mostly from around here and from around the state, to come and talk about issues, programs, things that are happening with regards to property, specifically distressed property, housing development. But we do this just to kind of create a space where everybody, people come from different sectors, constituents, but we like to create a space where people can come rub shoulders, and we can have actually pretty, hopefully, honest, open dialogue about these issues, which affects lots of Muncie. And I'm sure some of you see these kinds of issues, vacant and abandoned distressed properties all the time, where you live and work. We have, a few logistical things. We have food, really good. A lady named Petrona, the lady that was here, she does this. She has cards there, so if you ever want to do catering, grab one, she's great. Before we get started into the presentation today, we like for first-timers to quickly introduce themselves, share anything about yourself that you think is relevant. So we'll do introductions, and then it helps if we get food, and then come back, and then we start the meeting. So I see a lot of new faces. Who would like to start?
My name is Kevin Dispatch. I'm GIS specialist at County. Happy to be here.
Welcome.
Hi, I'm Brady. I own Lennox Alchemy, which is a remote accounting firm, but I live in Delaware County, and I'm just here to know what's going on.
Okay, welcome.
I do a lot of these flips for other people, so I figured I'd try to come in a little bit for myself and see what's going on.
Great, welcome.
Hey, my name's Bill East. I own dual craft carpentry and tile, and kind of same. We do a lot of work on houses like this, and kind of want to be in the know of what's going on.
Great, thanks for coming.
I'm on Aaron's. I work for the Soil and Water Conservation District. I do GIS work.
Awesome, thanks for coming.
My name is Agnos. I'm curious.
Okay, welcome. Anybody else new that would like to introduce themselves? Okay. Well, why don't we take, just a few minutes. Those who want food, it's really good. Hope you came with an appetite. Let's get some food. When we get settled back in, we'll get into the presentation. Excuse me. All right, everyone. We are going to get started here. So, the title of this presentation is Does the Tax Sale Deliver? And so, obviously, I'm going to talk just a little bit about land banking because maybe not everybody has heard of land banks, just a little bit, just because it's helpful for when you start talking about the tax sale. But this is the tax sale and its effectiveness is an issue of great importance to the land bank. Where land banks flourish, they work in close relationship with the county, because the county is the entity that has jurisdiction over property that goes tax delinquent and then runs the tax sale. So we've been, the land bank is, I think we were started in 2017. I think really started to function as a land bank in 2019. And to a degree, land banks are kind of new. They feel kind of new. There's been multiple generations of land banks. But where they flourish, they work closely with the county because one of their main purposes is to be basically an off-ramp for property that nobody really wants and that the tax sale doesn't necessarily help resolve. So we have done a lot of research on the tax sale. We have Zach, who's going to be the main speaker today, has been working on this kind of research since he started back in 2024. But we did kind of like a first level study of the tax sale and then presented some of those findings at the beginning of 2025. We actually presented it to the county with the hopes of kind of starting a dialogue about, hey, maybe there's a role for the land bank to grow in dealing with this issue. At the time, that proposal, we didn't get very far in that discussion. So we thought, okay, we need to keep at it, keep our nose down, keep doing investigation, research. And so we actually applied for a grant with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, who supports lots of kind of investigative studies all over the country. And we won this award to do this study. And so we've been working on it for the last 9 months. It's not complete. There's all kinds of questions that we still need to answer. And there's lots of work to be done. And I would say again, our goal with sharing this information is not to point the finger necessarily. Our goal is to say, hey, and we'll get there. I'm going to kind of I'm jumping all over the place. But the tax sale is a tool, and maybe there are ways that we can use it better. But so this is kind of a presentation that kind of goes through some of the main findings, analysis that we've done over the last 9-10 months. This is a quick overview of where we're going. You can see that real quick. Again, the meat is going to be Zach talking about the actual study. I just want to do a quick, does everybody know what a land bank is? Anybody not familiar with land banks? I don't want to spend too much time on it, but cities like Muncie, you can see this was a study done back, I think, in 2019-ish. Scout Muncie did a volunteer study, with volunteers, did a study to locate vacant, abandoned, distressed property. You can see that back in 2019 there was a lot of abandoned property, a lot of vacant property, a lot of distressed property. There's other maps that come with this. We've done a lot of updating this information. But this is not abnormal in places like Muncie, places that grew up with industry, and then as industry has left, one of those symptoms, and there are other reasons, but one of the symptoms is, or one of the causes is factories leaving, but then you have a lot of abandoned and vacant property. And Muncie's been dealing with that ever since. And there's been moments where it's fluctuated. There's been a lot more abandoned property. The financial crisis in 2008 created influx in distressed property. But this is a phenomenon that you see all over the Rust Belt. And cities and municipalities, counties have been figuring out how to use land banks. And so that's what Muncie did. Created a land bank, and in the most simplest kind of explanation, what a land bank is, it's an entity that's supposed to be going out and creatively acquiring property that the market has rejected, that's just kind of distressed and causing all kinds of problems for the city and neighbors, and then do the work of cleaning it up physically and legally as much as possible to try to take something that's a liability and turn it into a developable asset, which takes a lot of work. It's not easy. That's why it's a liability, and that's why it's been kind of rejected, because it's got a lot of things hanging on it that deters the market from responding to it. And then lastly, once that cleaning process is done, then the land bank looks for creative ways to get it back into the community's hands. And that can be 100 different things. It can be larger development, it can be small side lot programs, it can be community gardens, it can be housing development with nonprofits. And we're kind of involved in all of those spaces. Just one point, that not every tax sale property is vacant and abandoned and distressed, and not every vacant and abandoned and distressed property has been to the tax sale. However, there is a pretty strong correlation. So, I mean, again, I mentioned at the onset, the land bank, where land banks flourish, they basically have like a pipeline of property that comes from the tax sale. But just kind of to show you a few examples why the tax sale matters to us and why we're talking about it a bunch. This is an example of a property, 612 West 5th, that went delinquent back in 2019. Listed on the tax sale, didn't sell in 2020, again in 2021. It was listed on the deed sale, which comes after the tax sale. We don't get into that so much in this presentation, but that's another tool that the county government has to try to do something with property that hasn't gone through and been resolved through the tax sale. Listed on the deed sale, we bought it for $4,000. It was actually slated for demo by the city. We kind of intervened, had said, hey, building commissioner, can you guys hold off on that? Because we think we have a productive end for this property. And we sold that to a local nonprofit called Pathstone Corporation. I'm sure some of you have heard of that. Pathstone did their work on it, and then they sold it to a buyer for $80,000 in 2025. So that's a house that was part of our affordable housing stock, a single family homeowner there now. And this is kind of what that property looked like. It had some burn damage, and then this is after the rehab. This is what it looked like when we got it, and then this is what it looked like afterwards. Just another quick example, 2523 South Meeker. This is a property that went delinquent in 2015. It was listed on the sale and redeemed by the original owner, then listed again in 2019, listed again in 2023, 24, and then in April of 2024, I said, you know, we where land banks flourish, they have a pipeline. We've been able to work some with the county. We had 40 properties awarded to us in the spring of 2024, and that was a huge boon for the land bank and for some of the projects that you've heard us talk about. This is one of those properties. This property, well, I'll just say, we did our work, that cleanup process that I told you, the physical legal process. We sold it to Ant Properties. That's a local developer here. And then it's actually pending sale right now for 150 something there. And this is what this property looked like when we got it. This is what it looks like afterwards. This actually, this was a property that was squatted in. This is a property that when I went in, I mean, you were wading through some really rough stuff. This is actually after our cleanup. So this does not capture the condition of the house when we got it. But the house still had structural integrity. We got it through that award from the county, and it's now pending sale. So again, a house that really had no future, that hadn't sold through the tax sale. We got it, and we were able to, do some of that cleanup process, and we found the right person. You've heard us, if you've come to any of these meetings, you've heard us talk about the Old West End redevelopment project. We got part of that award in 2024. Were 20-some properties from the county in a specific area in the Old West End. These were properties that had gone through the tax sale on average more than 5 times. So you're talking years and years of neglect. We were able to, the county gave us those, and then we started this, what we call pre-development process. We spent 3.5 years bringing this project together. And you can see we partnered with the city. The city invited us to include our proposal in their larger ready proposal for Central City. And then the project was awarded $3.2 million. And so there's going to be 34 homes, most new infill, going to be some rehabs. 19 of those are going to be affordable. The other are going to be market rate. But this is an example of land banking. And before I pass it off to Zach and we get into this set, I just want to say that our goal as a land bank is not necessarily to say, look at us, the land bank. But what we want is that people understand that land banking is a tool, and it's not just something that happens, within a 6-month period where you think, well, I need some properties, I'm going to bank them. This is something that takes years, and it needs to be connected to long-term kind of planning, vision for what Muncie needs to see happen. If you were here for Colby's presentation last month, connecting the kinds of things that Colby was talking about with all the properties that cycle through the tax sale year after year after year. Land banks are tools, or the action of land banking is a tool to connect those things and see if we can't take something that's been in a cycle of disinvestment for decades and do something that nobody thought was possible. So I'm going to mute my mic and pass it off to Zach.
Wonderful. Can you all hear me? Okay, great. So I'm Zach Gullion. I work with Nate at the Land Bank. I went through the urban planning program at Ball State, and we learned a lot about vacancy, abandonment, and deteriorated property. And now working with the Land Bank, like Nate said multiple times, the tax sale is really a hotbed of vacant, abandoned, and deteriorating property. And it's where it's one of the steps in us acquiring a lot of our properties. But to say that, I'm not an expert by any means. I have a bachelor's degree, that's all. This isn't super scientific, and it's not peer reviewed. But the Urban Institute provided some technical assistance, who's a nationwide research organization, and then it was funded, like Nate said, by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. So we used this presentation at Prosperity, Indiana, who's a statewide organization. But there are two main objectives that I want to share about today. First off, I want to provide an understanding of the tax sale process in Indiana, the statutes that enable it, who participates in the tax sale, who benefits from the tax sale, and then what some strengths and shortcomings of the tax sale are. As well, Nate's going to come back up and he's going to talk about some policy proposals at a very basic level. What can be done to change this process in a way that it benefits more people, maybe more equitably. The data that I want to show you today is very quantitative. It's based off parcel level administrative records and property tax data, also a lot of geospatial analysis. As part of this research that's not talked about in this presentation, we completed field focus groups and over 100 resident interviews in conjunction with Habitat for Humanity on the industry neighborhood, which is one of the most affected or the highest concentration of tax sale parcels in the city of Muncie. And we also created field surveys. So this wasn't supposed to be quantitative data that's being used in this. It's really a next step that we'd like to continue with, but it gave us a nice holistic understanding of how the tax sale was affecting properties and individuals beyond what the numbers could tell us. The two main sources that I'm drawing from are the 2015 to 2025 Delaware County tax sale lists. Delaware County has varied their tax sale provider, the company that runs the tax sale over the years, which includes SRI, which we have two folks from SRI here today, and GUTS. I also used exports from Delaware County, from Indiana Gateway, which provide me with tax payment information and real property information. So there would be some items about assessed value in here, and that's where that information has been gathered from. So objective one, getting into it. So state code, the two important codes are IC 61124 and 61125. 61124 talks about the tax certificate auction, and 61125 talks about property transfers, as well as the deed sale, which we won't get into very heavily today. So there's two main goals of the tax sale as we see it. Now these goals aren't explicitly stated in the state code, but they're implicit in a way. So recouping delinquent taxes, of course, property taxes. You go to the tax sale because you haven't been paying your property taxes. So you need to the county and all the taxing units within that county need to recoup those delinquent taxes, as well as returning properties to productive use. Now it doesn't state this explicitly again as a goal, but by returning properties to productive use, you no longer have to worry about them being tax delinquent, and they would be actually producing revenue for the county and all the taxing units again. So tax sale basics. In Indiana, you have to go to you have to miss 3 consecutive tax payments in order to be listed at the sale, which is roughly 18 months. The minimum bid that you'll be listed for at the auction, which is the starting price of your listing, is made up of your delinquent taxes, any fines and special assessments, and other fees as well. And then it is an auction, so at sale, people are bidding against each other, and they bid up from that minimum bid if it's a desirable property, and that creates a surplus, which is going to be an important concept we talked about today. Some more basic mechanisms. So if a property doesn't sell, it can be relisted at a subsequent sale. There is some variation from county to county, but there's like an A sale and then a B sale. The A sale can include things like UBHA liens that they want satisfied, and then the B sale might take those off and just be property taxes. But so if you don't sell after 2 sales, the county has the ability, but not necessarily the obligation, the county commissioners to take that property to deed, which would clear all those things, and then they would sell it at that deed sale. They could also award it to a nonprofit. So in Indiana, nonprofits have a shortened redemption period for properties. Land banks don't have a special redemption period, but nonprofits, we are nonprofits, so we fit into that category. Tax certificate redemption, another important concept. Original owners can redeem their property by paying interest in the minimum bid of that property that's sold. And if an original owner decides not to redeem their property, whoever bid on that certificate and won that certificate could petition the court for the deed, for that tax deed. So that property would therefore transfer ownership. Again, I said surplus is going to be an important concept. So when a bid exceeds the minimum, surplus doesn't automatically go to the county. So the original owner, if the original owner chooses not to redeem the property, they can claim, they have a right to claim that bid surplus. So this is already in Indiana code, but there was a big Supreme Court case, Tyler v. Hennepin in 2024. Based on, it violated the Constitution. They decided in Minnesota, but what they said is that you have, the original owner have a property that's divested. If they lose their property to the tax sale, they do have a right to the surplus proceeds from the tax sale. Yes.
It's not pure foreclosure state. Minnesota is a pure foreclosure state, so it's a different regime, and what essentially happened and wouldn't naturally apply to me because we're not a foreclosure. We're a real estate.
Okay. Thank you for that. I will say, okay, well, the certificate purchaser then, I'm just going to continue here. If the original owner redeems that property within the first 6 months, they would receive their money back plus 10% interest on that money. If it was redeemed within the second 6 months, so it's months 6 through 12, they receive their bid back plus 15% interest, as well as 5% annualized on their surplus bid that they placed. Now for the county to receive this money, since I said it doesn't automatically go to the county, if the original owner does not redeem their property, and they have 3 years in a tax sale surplus escrow fund to claim those dollars. And if they don't claim those dollars within 3 years, then the county is allowed to transfer that to their general fund. And as far as I'm aware, from reading the state code as well as the treasurer's manual handbook, there's no requirement for them to transfer it to sub-taxing units, those extra surplus dollars. So these are the property pathways. This is a very broad view of a chart, but once a property is listed at the tax sale, if the taxes are paid before the sale, it gets removed from the sale. If it does not sell, or if taxes are not paid before the sale, it goes to auction. At that auction, it can either be sold or not sold. If it does sell, then the owner has that 1 month period to redeem that property and pay that lien off essentially. And if they don't redeem, that's when the purchaser of that tax certificate can transfer that property into their name through a tax deed. So this information here is from 2015 to 2023. So I gathered this data before the redemption period was over in 2024. So we took off 24 and 25 to have essentially 8 complete redemption periods. So most tax certificates, is what we found, is that at the auction they did not sell. You can see in the top in the dark blue, we have those that did not sell and those that did sell. And those that did not sell made up 73% of the certificates that were offered at the sale. Those that did sell made up 27% roughly at the sale. Moving into further outcomes, so what happens after they originally sell or don't sell. Properties that were sold and then later redeemed, is at the top here. You can see that made about 16.5%. There's those that were sold and deeded to bidder. And then at the bottom, you can see ones that are sold or do not sell and then are eventually deeded to the county commissioners. So the county commissioners take it through that process because that certificate was not selling at auction. And you can see that that vastly outweighs the ones that are actually sold at the certificate sale and then deeded to those bidders. Yeah?
Why does that percentage under the black line have more than the percentage that are sold?
Those are, I believe, of everything, not just the ones that don't sell. So of everything that goes to the tax sale, 16.5% actually sell and then are redeemed. Of everything that's offered at the tax sale, 16% of those do not sell and then are deeded to the commissioners. So it's not just of the sold. Sorry, thank you for that. So immediately we can see, I'd like to compare these two. We talk about transfer of ownership being an important step in this process. Transferring ownership can put the property into the hands of a responsive owner who's going to be paying taxes and maybe work on the property, invest some money into it. But through the tax sale itself, 9% of the properties that are being offered at the tax sale over these years are actually selling as a tax certificate and then being deeded to the bidder, while 16% are not selling and are being deeded, so they're transferring ownership, but they're going to the county commissioners who are taking the brunt of that and then reoffering at a deed sale or awarding to an organization like ourselves. So 2015 to 2025, I had said before that slide, eliminated 24 and 25 to account for the redemption period completion. But this is just the numbers immediately after the sales happened. So 2015, 2025, and this excludes the 2020 tax sale year, which we were not provided complete information for. So in these years, there were almost 5,200 properties, certificates that were offered at sale. Of those certificates, based on state parcel ID numbers, there were a little over 2,600 unique properties. And of those 2,600 unique properties, a little over 1,500 appeared only once in this time frame, but over 1,000 appeared 2 or more times. And importantly, those 2,600 unique properties in Muncie make up almost 9% of all the parcels in Muncie. There are around 30,000 parcels in Muncie, so this is a rather large share of all the properties that we have. But they're not evenly distributed throughout Muncie, so there's not appearances here, here, and here. There's really a concentration. So on the south and east sides of Muncie, which we have determined, we consider everything south of the White River and everything east of the Norfolk Southern Railroad tracks. And it's shown by that red line. So 14.2% of all properties on the southeast sides of Muncie have been to the tax sale during this time period. Whereas on the northwest side of Muncie, where Ball State is and where a lot of the new investment is happening, it's 1.7% of all northwest parcels. So on the south and east sides of Muncie are the older parts of the city, the first parts of the city that were created in Muncie's early days. And the new expansion, a lot of the new expansion has been north and west, toward the west side of campus. But you can see a major distinction there between how many properties have appeared. Digging a little deeper into that, again, I had said 14.2% of all southeast parcels, but even on the south and east sides of Muncie, it's still not, there's not an even distribution. There's concentrations in particular areas. So in the industry neighborhood, which is one of Muncie's legacy neighborhoods, 25% of all properties that are in the industry neighborhood have been to the tax sale at least once in the last 10 tax sales. In the Whiteley neighborhood, over 20% have been to the tax sale in the last 10 years. And then all the other neighborhoods, excluding those two, make up about 12.7% of properties have been to the tax sale in the last 10 years. So in the northwest side of Muncie, overall 1.7% have been to the tax sale, and then there's neighborhoods on the south and east sides that have had properties, 25% of all properties have been to the tax sale in the last 10 years. So it's very hard to be standing anywhere and look around and not see a property that's been to the tax sale. 1 in 4. So these figures I'm about to show you are of all the unique properties that have been offered. So it's framed a little bit differently than the stats I showed earlier, but 49% of unique properties sold at one point or another. Didn't sell every single time they were offered, but at some point or another they received enough money to sell. 39%, again, at one listing or another, transferred ownership, which includes when the county takes those properties to deed and transfer them into their name. And 6.8% of all these properties transferred, went through the system, and then ended up back at the auction. So they transferred ownership to what should have been a responsive owner who's going to pay taxes and invest money into the property, but they ended up going back to the tax sale anyway. So this graph shows the average minimum sale price of properties based on how many times they've been to the tax sale and the average amount that those properties are selling for. So on the x-axis at the bottom, you can see the number of tax sale appearances. And then on the left side, those are dollars. The orange axis is the average minimum sale price. So how much needs to be spent in order for that property, yes?
How is tax sale revenue measured? What does that number consist of that you see on the left-hand side?
Well, they're just dollars right now.
Say again?
Dollars, but average minimum sale price. So what the property, on average, based on how many tax sale appearances there have been for that group of properties. So everything that's only gone to the tax sale once in this time period. Average minimum sale price. So what needs to be spent for it to sell. And the average amount of sales, so what people are bidding on those properties.
So that's delinquent taxes, that's
Yes.
all that accumulation.
What's the minimum bid? I guess the question I have is, you have a minimum bid which represents delinquent taxes, special assessments, things like that. Then you have overbid amounts that would be non-tax recovering amounts. So it would be, that amount you were talking about would go perhaps into the county general fund or something. Are we measuring that in this? It sounds like
So,
you can figure out a sale price.
I'm going to get there just in a second. So the average minimum sale price, again, is the minimum bid. And the amount of sale is what, on average, is being those properties that have appeared one time over this time period have sold for. So everything in between would be showing surplus. On average, these properties sell for more than what they're listed at. They sell for more than what they're delinquent for. And that continues for the first and second tax sale appearance. But once we get on average to appearing 3 times or more, it's a loss. These taxes are not being recovered by the tax sale process. So what this is meant to say is that for tax properties that have are appearing for the third or more time, it doesn't really make sense to run them through the tax sale because they're not going to sell and they're not going to recoup any dollars on average. So we talked about surplus dollars and the surplus, the escrow fund, and how that works. In 2019, from the tax sale, there were roughly $886,000 in surplus generated. So from the properties that sold, and they sold above their minimum bid, $886,000 in surplus revenue was generated. But in 2022, so 3 years after the tax sale was complete, so the 3-year escrow fund had run its course, you can't claim that money anymore. In 2022, Delaware County reported a budget transfer taking in $72,000, specifically labeled tax sale surplus escrow. So it's surplus money. A lot of it was claimed, and then $72,000 is actually what made it to the Delaware County's general fund. And what their general fund, from what their budget was, their adopted general fund budget in 2022, that roughly makes up 0.2% of that money. Similar case in 2018, there was $1.8 million generated in surplus from the sale. 154,000 transferred in 2021, so 3 years after again, and that makes up 0.5% of the adopted general fund budget. And I just realized that I didn't say something that's very important here. This is just for Muncie. So this was a spatially clipped of all the Delaware County tax sale. So Delaware County runs the tax sale process. We can only operate within Muncie. That's all we have jurisdiction to do. So this is about Muncie properties, and all of those Muncie tax sale appearances from the county tax sale have been clipped. We're not analyzing any of the county properties in this analysis. So this is to say that the county running these properties through the tax sale that makes surplus makes sense in returning them to someone who might pay the taxes or invest in that property. But it's not some money producer for the county or for the taxing units, relatively to how much they really spend. So it's not a money producer. That's not the reason to do it. This is a long excerpt from our report. But even if all those dollars on average made it through and were not claimed for the properties that transferred ownership, it only make up about 9% of the revenue that was not recovered. So the properties that didn't sell, all that delinquency, the surplus would only make up 9% of that. So if you look at the tax sale as a whole, it's not a net gain. I want to spend some time here looking at the incentive for people to participate in the tax sale, the buyers, the bidders. So I mentioned before how the interest structure works. Again, the minimum bid, depending on when it was redeemed, if it gets redeemed, it's either 10% or 15% on your money, plus a 5% that's prorated out for the whole year on your surplus bid. And here's a table laying that out. So if you annualized your return, say, and you're going to put that money somewhere else after just a month, your return is the highest in month one, because you get 10% on your minimum bid, and then a fraction of that 5% on your surplus.
So, just, I don't know if everybody can see that, but if a property, minimum bid is 5,000, there's a surplus of 5,000, so 10,000 total. This is a chart that kind of shows the annualized returns of that if it was redeemed.
Real quick, why would the county want to generate surplus?
Say that again?
Why would the county want to generate surplus? If you have, we're measuring the amount of surplus that designates success tax sale up to this point. The surplus is not the goal of the tax sale. The minimum bid is all the delinquencies, special assessments, things of that nature. So theoretically, you do not want to generate a surplus. You want to collect those taxes because the surplus either goes to that property owner, or that purchaser, someone other than the county, because you really don't want it going from the general fund. It's not the purpose of it.
Well, I think my point is, yes, that's 100% true. Not everyone here has a really strong understanding of the tax sale. Some folks have never really heard of how the tax sale, know how it works. And when we first started discussing this, there was an understanding that the surplus money was kept by the county. And to clarify that, that's what the intention of that was, to clarify that surplus money isn't going to the county. So if the county's only selling, 30% of the properties that go to the sale, that means they're only making the money back on 30% of the properties that they listed the tax sale in the first place. And even if they're generating surplus on those properties, that surplus isn't benefiting them. So yes. With this graph, or with this table, why participate in the tax sale? Well, you can get really good returns on your money for this. And what we see is that, and other charts will show you here moving forward, but there's an incentive for you to bid on properties that you think are going to get redeemed, because you get interest. So even if you're not going to get the property, you can get interest on the tax certificate and the money that you put down on that certificate. So There is a big disparity between different classes of participants in the tax sale. So we have the top 5 buyers, the next 15 buyers, and the remaining buyers, which is 209. So those top 5 buyers, competing with the other 221 buyers in the tax sale, acquired almost 40% of the certificates that were offered and spent almost 60% of the dollars spent at the tax sale, which was $11.6 million. Just those top 5 buyers. So 5 people out of 226 participants were spending 60% of the money at the tax sale.
Zach, are those institutional buyers typically?
Yes, and I'm going to do, we have a small, short profile on it, but they've created organizations, but they're not large organizations, I would say. These are the individuals over these tax sales who have participated the most. And importantly, 3 of these organizations are run by the same individual. MJUL, MDOED, and SFTF are run by the same individual. And they participated in the tax sale further back than the 10 years ago, and acquired a significant portion of tax certificates and spent a significant portion of the money that was spent at this tax sale.
Are they funds that people participate in and then they pay out proceeds?
Can you, sorry.
Is it an investment type of company?
I don't.
As shareholders that.
I'm not 100% sure to speak on that. I do know that some people partner with banks. Like even at the tax certificate sale, you'll see their organization's name partnered with a bank. And they make those investments on those tax certificates. And I know you can take out loans to do this type of work. But I wouldn't say that these are investment firms. I would say that they're generally real estate firms. But that's to say that most of these organizations, once they acquire a property, they transfer it out to another organization. These are the ones that are used to acquire the tax certificates at the sale. Our understanding is that the top participants of the tax sale, one, they're not out-of-state buyers. It's not an big out-of-state organization who's coming in and being predatory at the tax sale and acquiring everything. Not to say that there aren't out-of-state predatory participants. There very well might be, and there are out-of-state organizations who participate, but the top 5 are all hyperlocal. And what we see from this is that the properties aren't, the participation is not about getting properties per se. Because the top 5 who spend the most money and have the upper hand and buy the most certificates, proportionally, are actually getting the fewest deeds issued to them. The remaining 191 bidders, remember, spent a fraction of what the top 5 spent, but they actually had more deeds issued to them. So they're seeing property transfer more often, even though they're spending much less. So they're not institutionally backed, and they don't have tons of capital to expend. It's what we would consider the mom and pops, buying 1 or 2 certificates at the sale. And they're the ones who are actually seeing those properties transfer into their name. Again, so this comparison is from the top 5 bidders and everyone else. And the bottom shows the assessed value of these properties in manually classified bins. But you can see properties from $10,000 to over $50,000. Most of those are being acquired by the top 5 bidders. They outpace the other 221 bidders in the sale. properties that are less than $10,000 in value, that's where the others can shine. That's the properties that aren't bid on as much by the top 5, but they also don't, they don't bid on those properties that are less than $10,000. That's where everyone else has the opportunity to participate. Property type here. In Indiana, you can classify property using the tax caps. So homestead residential, if you're owner occupied, and your primary residence, that's a 1% cap. Other residential is 2%, as well as farmland, and 3% is commercial. That's how much you can get taxed on your gross assessed value. For this analysis, farmland, because of its type, has been moved into the commercial category because it's not being used as residential. But the properties, the properties that are most often redeemed are the ones that are homestead residential. So properties that people are actively living in are the ones that actually end up getting redeemed. So if I was a buyer who wanted to go make interest and didn't want to have to worry about acquiring the property or being a landlord, I might bid on homestead residential because I had a very strong likelihood that property was going to get redeemed and I get my interest on. Yes?
How are you evaluating whether or not someone is living in the property for it to be classified as those being the ones that are redeemed?
As those are being redeemed?
How are you evaluating whether or not the property has someone living in it and is therefore redeeming the property? Is it just yes, we do not evaluate the actual residency of them. But to get a homestead exemption, you are supposed to be living in that house as your primary residence, which will be a 1% cap. That's the only thing that can get a 1% tax cap, so it'd be homestead residential. Does that answer your question? Homestead deduction, but no one's actually living in the property, right?
Yes, it could be.
Maybe like a vacant field.
No, you can't get a homestead deduction on a vacant field.
But if someone files a homestead deduction for a vacant field and is granted it would still be a homestead deducted property, right?
No, I'm sure they'd look at the improvement value, and that's also fraud. So for the benefit of this analysis, no. No. If you want to go count how many cases of fraud there's been on homestead exemptions, that'd be good. So other residential here, again, likely occupied, it has a tenant. Again, there's no guarantees of occupancy, we can't see occupancy. But 47.4% of the properties that are other residential were redeemed. Whereas properties that were commercial, that'd include vacant land, because vacant land is taxed at 3%. If it's not part of your homestead or your other residential property, only 11.6% of the properties in this tax sale were sold that were commercial, and much less were redeemed, much fewer were redeemed. And this is tying the assessed value to the percent of total listings that are either redeemed or sold. And you can see as the assessed value increases on properties, the redemption rate and the rate at which those properties sell at the sale both increase. So these higher value properties are much more enticing to bid on at the sale. Not only because you might acquire them, but also because that means that there's more interest-bearing capability or potential. Again, I'm a statistical amateur, but I wanted to show this linear regression of 2018 to 2025, again excluding 2020, just to show the relationship between improvements value, the improvements AV, and take a step back. You have a total assessed value of your house, and that's made up of your land value and your improvements value. So anything that is affixed to your land is your improvements AV. And so what we were seeing without doing the regression is that the properties that have a lot of improvements AV are the ones that are receiving a lot of bid surplus, which makes sense because you can make money back on that, especially if it's occupied and it might get redeemed. But we wanted to show the actual correlation. So in all these tax sales, the R squared was 33.7%. So 33.7% of the bid surplus was determined by the improvement's value. And what we saw is for every 12-cent increase in bid surplus, there was a $1 increase in improvement's value. So every $1 that your improvement's value is higher on the property, your bid surplus is going to be increasing by 12%. Some years this was a different relationship or stronger relationship. In 2025, same analysis, 59.2% of bid surplus could be determined by the improvement's value. And for every $1 of the 2025 listings, for every $1 that the improvement's value increased, the bid surplus increased by 52 cents. So there is a relationship between how much people bid on properties beyond what's due and how much they are worth, based on the county's assessments. So what can we take away from some of this analysis here? Is that tax certificate purchasers are the ones who are the most apparent winners of this process. You can make a lot of money through interest from this. But it's not necessarily the municipalities who are successful because of this process. It's not necessarily the county or the city. And the properties themselves don't seem to be succeeding either if they don't have the value already to make them a successful interest-bearing mechanism for the bidders. And this is a quick time lapse of properties in Muncie over the last 10 years. As those parcels get darker in red, that means that they're appearing multiple times. So as the opacity increases or the transparency decreases, you can see that those parcels have appeared more. And you can really see with this map the concentration of where some of these properties are, like on the south and east sides of Muncie versus the northwest side of Muncie. I'm going to pass it back off to Nate. He's going to talk about the summary findings, as well as some of our policy recommendations and what our next steps are. I'm happy to come back up if there's questions after his presentation. Thank you.
Okay, am I on? Yeah. So I was going to touch on some of the findings. These are still kind of like in report speak. I'm just going to kind of, from layman terms, kind of explain some of these things. A lot of these things are things that have probably already come clear to you, and a lot of them are pretty rational. So, the first one, the tax sale functions as a sorting mechanism, not as a resolution system. When you think about putting something in a system, like say, you take berries and you put them in some kind of press, and you do the process, and then, anyways, you get juice. It transforms it. That's not necessarily what you see with the tax sale. Not every single property goes in the system and comes out differently. What it's more like is it's a sorting system. It's more like you got different size. It's like a gumball machine, and it goes around and around, and then it comes out certain sizes, certain flavors. It sorts it. It really is kind of like a mirror to what the property are. And so number two, effectiveness is concentrated where it's least needed. The properties that get bought at the tax sale and redeemed or actually transfer ownership, most of the time those are properties that would probably get paid off anyways. They're temporary issues. They're properties that have assessed value. They're properties that a lot of them are occupied. And they're properties that people have incentive to redeem. So it works where it's where the market is already stronger, and it doesn't work very well where there's distress. Neighborhoods that have been disinvested in for decades, they're not sending properties to the tax sale and they're coming out resolved. They're just kind of going through the process, which kind of talks, I'll just jump to number 4. Outcomes are geographically concentrated and reflect patterns of disinvestment. Again, the 3 top neighborhoods, Zach mentioned Whiteley, Industry, another one up there is Old West End. He compared, the difference between the number of properties that are going through on the south and east sides. What was it, like 14%? The northwest side, under 2%, 1.7%, I think it is. The tax sale is dealing with properties on one side of town, basically. It should have come through, but outcomes are very systematically related to the actual characteristics. Again, properties that have higher assessed value, properties that tend to be occupied, properties that are in neighborhoods that have some level of market strength. Those are the kinds of properties where you're seeing positive outcomes as they go through the tax sale. Number 6, the tax sale, and this is not something that necessarily is stated as part of one of its objectives, but I think it's something that a lot of people assume, that the tax sale helps stabilize these areas where there's lots of tax delinquency. That's not the case. You can see that time lapse. That's not the case. It's not about neighborhood stabilization. That's not what the state law articulates. So you're not necessarily holding the tax sale to that standard, but it's clear that that's not one of the things that's happening. And that's one of the things that sometimes we make assumptions about. I used to make that assumption. Fiscal recovery is limited and highly selective. Again, highly selective being, properties that are likely to have taxes paid off anyways, or properties that they're temporarily delinquent. Zach talked about some of the fiscal recovery for the county. Just a few things. One, the money that actually gets passed to the county after it goes, after it sits in that escrow for 3 years, the surplus, that's not something that goes to Muncie. What's your issue?
It seems like we're hyper-concentrating on surplus, and the purpose and the function of the tax sale and tax sale statute is not to generate surplus. Mm-hmm. The county does not care if surplus is generated. The county wants to collect the taxes. They want to collect that minimum bid, so when you make a statement that you're not receiving the surplus, correct. That's what the statutes are not designed to do. We're not moving surplus. We're collecting taxes for individual county and municipal government units and distributing those funds to those units. That's the minimum bid. No one cares about the surplus.
Okay, I can accept that. I guess we're in agreement that the surplus is really kind of there's not much added benefit for the county on that.
Right, and if we start going off the rails with the whole Hannibal County case, that's it.
Well, I guess my question is 30% of properties being actually sold at the tax sale, is that success? And 70% going unsold?
That's pretty common, unfortunately.
But is that, that's my question. It's not necessarily, we're not making the argument that the tax sale is irrelevant.
Right.
We're making the argument that the tax sale can be so much more effective if there's some thought and some planning and some collaboration between administrative units. That's our argument.
And I get that, but when we started off saying the land bank's looking for properties that are distressed that we're really trying to take care of, and now we're not in the tax sale system saying it sorts properties improperly. Well, no, it sorts them perfectly. Because when they don't go sold, those are the properties that the land bank needs to get their hands on, because that's telling you that those are the properties that are distressed to the point that they're creating blight in our community.
And I think that's our argument. That's where I'm going to go here in the next couple slides. I think we're in agreement there. What I would say is that the tax sale, the way we're running it year after year after year, it's kind of like it's a habit that we do, and there's some benefit to it. But
Yeah,
it can be, go ahead.
I'm not sure I understand completely, but isn't surplus the incentive at the top end of these properties to buy a certificate? If as an investor, if I'm not going to be able to put surplus in to get interest on, am I even buying at the top end at the highest valuation property?
I guess, I mean, are you, I mean, one of the assumptions that I have is that the guys that are actually going in there and buying up globs of property, they want to bid them up. You know, it sounds like you guys have some, you know, experts in here, but it seems like.
So it gets the rate of interest, but the surplus protects the current owner is what it does, because if the current owner has more value than the taxes that are owed, that current owner walks away with the surplus if they don't redeem the property. It doesn't just take someone's house for $1,000 in taxes owed. They can receive the tens of thousands of surplus that might have been added to that. So it's there to protect the original owners more than the intent of surpluses. And this is the fair way that the state statutes have come up with selling the parcels, so they're sold at open market value. They have to be auctioned for open market value. You cannot just say, hey, Nate or Zach, I'll sell you this for, the auditor can't say, the treasurer can't say, I'll sell you this for $2,000. No, it has to go to an open market, open auction, where anyone can register.
Two consecutive tax sales.
No, just one. No, just one. That was incorrect.
Okay, okay, that's great news.
After one tax sale, if it fails to sell in a tax sale, the county has the option to act just as the buyer and exercise their tax lien on it and take ownership of that property. They have to notify, they have to do all of the things just as a regular buyer after one sale. They can also transfer to the land bank or any other qualified non-profit.
I guess, so talking about the fiscal, you know, nature of the tax sale, this is where, you know, if you run a property through the first time, it seems to work fairly well, correct? But as you were just saying, and it's interesting that you're saying now one tax sale, because we had understood two tax sales. Those numbers, those gaps close quickly, and it's really kind of almost like a systemic flaw.
Understand a couple things. One, those taxes keep getting stacked, as well as all of the late charges, all the late fees, all of those things. So that house that might have been in the tax sale at $1,000 in the first year is $1,500 the second, $1,700 the third, $2,500.
And at the same time, it's losing value because it's sitting there delinquent for time. So that's what we're saying. It's great.
This is a measure of surplus. You're measuring the surplus loss in the
Okay.
It makes sense to continue running it through the tax sale.
That's what we're saying. And it sounded like you were kind of agreeing with that. Run it through the tax sale. After it gets through a number of times, whatever, we've talked to the county and, you know, they've asked us not even ask for properties if they haven't gone through twice. From the numbers, that seems to make sense. And I would say one other thing. This, you know, the cost or you know, the money that's involved in all this we're just talking about in a micro, you know, one-to-one kind of relationship. We're not talking about all the cost of abandoned vacant property that costs the city. I mean, the tax revenue, the property taxes that are, you know, decreasing, the properties that are around property, you know, the abatement costs, the mowing, the police, the fire calls, you know, the negative impacts on the city. We're not even talking about those things. We're talking about this very one-to-one relationship and saying that after one or maybe two tax sales, it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense.
And I agree with you.
However, and just one thing.
Fails to measure.
Let me finish, and then.
Delaware County engages in a Title 36 sale, so Delaware County is opted to take deed to these properties and sell the deeds to the individuals because it doesn't make sense. So we're throwing rocks at the tax sale, but we're not measuring what is actually happening in Delaware.
Well, just a couple things. Again, I think we agree that there's something that's happening here after one or two tax sales.
Yes, the county is taking deed to them, selling the deeds instead of the liens.
That's we just acquired 40 properties that have been through the tax sale 5 or 6 times.
And it's not always consecutive. They can take the deed.
We have the numbers that show properties that have gone through the tax sale, you know, hundreds of times. Or that's obviously, that's an exaggeration. Excuse me. Hundreds of times aggregately, excuse me. But this shows a systemic flaw that as the, just, I think you do, I don't think you want to listen. It's the property's getting more and more expensive as the actual value of the property is decreasing. That's happening over time. That's what this shows. And that's not, and again, we're not taking into cost, you know, that everybody's feeling across the city.
Sorry, question. So I feel like the surplus, I may not be wrong, the surplus that needs to go after, I think it's more like, you guys are saying it's an argument point of like, when these houses are not worth the minimum bid by the time they're going to put tax in. So I don't think they're getting caught up on the surplus being money that's made. We're saying that these properties are, that would be worth $10,000, not getting the bid to pay for the taxes entirely because they've already went through the tax sale like once.
Yeah.
It's a number thing that we're chasing after goodness to say that after it's been through 10 times, nobody's going to buy it for the tax cut in the first place.
Yeah, and I'm just saying we would cede that point. You know, if it's not about the surplus.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear. So, and that's, I can hear. Basically, that's where they had the Title 36, like that was just done here a few months ago, where they lowered it all.
And how many of those? What was it about? Less than 30% that actually sold at the deed sale. We were there. We were the largest buyer. We bought 13. There were so that's great. That's another tool. We haven't studied that, but 30% of the property sold there.
But I think the biggest difference is in what so the state statute, all the state statute speaks to is for the county and the municipalities to recover their monies owed. That is the function of taxing. I understand your premise. I own several properties myself. I've bought distressed properties, fixed them up, got rentals in them. I've spent over, in Delaware and Henry County, over $2 million doing that of my own personal money. So I understand the premise, but that's not the state statute's premise of taxing. The state statute's tax, and just like you said, Muncie doesn't get the surplus. No, they don't, but they got their taxes that they were owed.
On 30% of the properties.
When that property was sold, they got their taxes. And that is the avenue that is provided by the state of Indiana for the Muncie to recover those funds.
And again, I just want to move on, but I mean, I think we're actually fairly in agreement. And if I can get to the policy, there may be some things where we you know, it would be helpful to consult with some experts, and you all of those. So that's an invitation. But I think we're in agreement that there's some opportunity to do something after the tax sale does what it can do. And so I'm going to jump back to some of the major findings and then get into some policy recommendations. And then we'll close out or have some questions. Market participation is concentrated and oriented towards financial returns. You know, again, I don't look at those guys and say they're bad actors. Those guys they figured it out. They're purchasing properties. They're contributing to the tax revenue of the city. The system works pretty well. But again, there's another, you know, huge swath of properties. When we go to the tax sale, you know, you go to a tax sale, if anybody's been there, you know, there's active bidding on about, you know, 40% of the properties. And then you go through whole pages and say, is anybody interested in property? And, you know, crickets. Next one, crickets. Next one, crickets. We're talking about those properties. Anyways, these guys help with the higher assessed value properties. And I would say that they are looking for properties that are occupied and that have value, because those are the ones that people have incentive to redeem. It's a good business. But it also, what it's kind of become is it kind of shuts out the smaller mom and pop developers to actually acquire properties that have value. And I don't know if that's what, you know, is intended.
But even in your own data, not to belabor all this, but even in your own data, less than 7% of those bought by someone like Tom Terry go back to the tax. I bet you there's 0 bought by Tom Terry. So he is taking those parcels, he's taking even those distressed parcels and dumping in additional revenue out of the capital, and he's selling them, he's doing whatever. If only 7% in your own data are going back, that's 93% that were successful.
This is at a 10-year period.
Sorry?
This isn't a 10-year period, though. I mean,
I understand that, but that's a pretty broad period. I mean, that's half your life. It's your age. I mean, that's a long time. That's 10 years is a pretty broad stroke. I mean, and Tom's been doing this since the 80s, I think he told me at one point. So it's, if only 7%, less than 7% are returning back to that recidivism rate, that's a pretty good recidivism rate. Because yours was like 6.9, if I remember correct, Zach, right? It was like 6.9% return that sold out of the 2,600 and change, 6.9.
But you have to understand, I mean, a lot of those properties, maybe they appeared in 2015 for the last time, and Tom Terry bought it. But that could have appeared who knows how many times in the time period before. And that's the limitation of this data. It doesn't go back to 2008 when the recession happened, right? And a lot of properties faced mortgage and tax foreclosure. So there could have been plenty of appearances that have wiped out the value of these properties before 2015 was at the doorstep. So in this period, if we're already seeing a 7%, when a lot of the financial issues have been remediated that were happening in the early 2000s, what was it like before? It speaks to something.
Yeah, I mean, I think the conclusion is this: the market participation is concentrated. You got a handful of guys local here that have access to capital, and they make money at the tax sale. It's not necessarily a space where, you know, you think you can walk in and get a great deal on a property that's got value and you're going to rehab it. And I think, and I'm interested in what you all think, maybe not here, but my assumption is that's really the kind of the motivating factor. You know, a lot of these guys will get property, and because they're responsible, they'll if they actually get ownership, if it's actually transferred to them, they will do something positive with it. They'll invest in it, they'll sell it, they'll rent it, whatever. But their model is the interest that they can earn on it. Like that's kind of like the strategy, and that's why, you know, owner-occupied high assessed values are the ones that they bid up, because they know that they're going to be able to recoup that. Would you agree? Yeah.
We live in a capitalist society. So
Yeah.
it's the way to make money.
Yeah.
That's why every business in this room is.
And part of this process for me has been to kind of dispel some of the myths, you know, that you think the tax sale is a place where anybody can walk into and make, you know, bid up a property, get something, and rehab it. And it's not necessarily the case. The ones that have higher value are spoken for.
Well, I mean, anybody can bid. You just
Yes.
have to have the capital.
Got to have the capital.
You know, that's every business. I can't go on.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think now we can finally get to objective 2.
But just to add to your comment, the only thing I will say again is the reason to do that is exactly to protect the owner. Because you want to protect the owner's value in that property. That's why we offer properties. That's why the state offers properties in an open market, because it protects that original owner. We don't know that original owner story. It could be a family that's mom, dad, grandma died, and now it's the heirs to that estate or what have you. But that's why it's offered in an open market. That's why it's the highest bidder takes the win, because it's worth what the market will bear, and that's how it protects the owner. So I think I wouldn't want to go a different system other than that, because that should protect the owner who's got those years of investment in that person.
So now getting to the final piece, talking about some policy recommendations, and these are, you know, there are a lot of places around the country that are experimenting with different ways of dealing with a vacant and abandoned property. Just for a little context, though, I mean, Muncie, it is a small, shrinking city. We're, you know, operating within a highly centralized political system, which can create some challenges for, you know, making changes to things. And cities are strapped economically. You know, in 2009, you know, huge revenue lost through property tax legislation, 42% decrease. And then recently last year, that, you know, there was some discussion here locally about like how is this going to affect us. So, you know, we want to take into account some of the challenges that our governments are facing because of lack of funding. But again, I started at the beginning, and I feel like where there's been some maybe disagreement, perhaps maybe with the way we frame things, I think this is where we're actually probably more aligned. Reframing the role of the tax sale. For me, you know, the light went on when I started to think about, you know, property goes delinquent. It's you know, it's in this kind of cycle of downward spiral, neglected, abandoned, and there's this moment in time where there's an opportunity for intervention. You know, Indiana, we give our property owners lots and lots of opportunity to maintain their property rights, which probably, you know, most of us think that's a great thing. But there is a moment in time, and the tax sale is that, when there's an opportunity to actually intervene and do something different. And what it seems like is like, that's why I was talking about the tax sale, is just kind of, it's a habit. We just do it. There's not a lot of thought about what's going in and then what's coming out. And it's a huge opportunity that seems missed, to think, you know, very thoughtfully about this process, and potentially connecting it with you know, some longer term planning, like kinds of things that Colby talked about last month. Targeting intervention before and after the sale. I mean, I think you know, we know, and that's why when you at the tax sale, you hold up a sheet and say, is there anybody that's going to bid on this? You know that likely there's not going to be a bid. There's an opportunity to actually look at the properties before the tax sale and say which ones are going to be bid on. I mean, you know, if there's some gray area, run into the tax sale, but all the ones that we know are not going to run to the tax sale, there's an opportunity to, instead of cycling through and wasting time and money, to think of creative off-ramps for those properties. Strengthening the role of the land bank, obviously, we're one of those off-ramps. Expanding tools for property stabilization. You know, we have other administrative units. We have the UBHA, we have the building commissioner, we have code enforcement, and we have the land bank now. There's an opportunity to do much more coordination, much more kind of like figuring out where we're all kind of aligning the tools that we have to deal with this issue. Right now, everybody tends to kind of work siloed, and again, part of that is because there's a stress on the resources the government have to bring in, hire more people and have planners that kind of connect everything. But that's an opportunity. Redirecting financial flows towards stabilization. If we recognize that in large part the tax sale does not resolve distressed property. It resolves properties that have value. So if it's not really helping with distressed property, is there a way we can, I don't know if you all have seen this, it's probably something that you may not like, but is there an opportunity to charge a fee or something for people that are participating in the tax sale? Some of these guys that are benefiting economically from the tax sale. Is there something?
It's expressly prohibited by statute.
It's a legal thing, I know, but there are opportunities to make legal changes, because there are places that do it very differently, because they think about stabilization and they say, well, that's our goal. So how can we, that's a state legislative issue.
That's a federal issue. I mean, it would be an unconstitutional issue.
That's not true. I know there's all kinds of states that do things where they have an extra fee or something connected to the tax sale.
I'll offer to pick up the tab if they will let you finish making your points.
Yeah.
You guys get drinks later and sort out the details.
Yeah, I would love to talk.
For someone who's the first time here to hear back and forth, it's pretty tedious. Like, let's let them make the point and then you guys can act along.
This is another one that's related to, you know, legislation. You know, if there's, you know, we have a system that rewards bidding on properties and getting that interest income. Good thing, bad thing? It sounds like there's some discussion about that, but that's something that you could look at. Aligning the tax sale with neighborhood level strategy, that's kind of something that I've harped on, related to planning, looking at these neighborhoods, Whiteley, Industry, Thomas Park Avenue, South Central, Old West End, thinking 3 to 5 years from now, what could we do if we had a cluster of these properties that have been cycling through the tax sale multiple times? And we started to set those aside, and we started to do that cleanup process. And then when we got a cluster, then we're actually able to do something. Create a bastion of development that we couldn't otherwise because it's being dispersed to all these different people. Or not, just cycling through. And supporting in political engagement. I mean, this is kind of, one of the things that we hope that this presentation is a tool for communities that are affected by the tax sale to understand that. A lot of people at the neighborhood level, they feel these things, they see these things, but they don't necessarily connect it to a administrative process. And so part of this is an opportunity to explain. In part, this is something that's affecting you, and so you have a voice, and you can influence decision makers. So yeah, closing thought. What I keep saying, because we're not anti-tax sale, we actually have kind of come through this study and realized that the tax sale is very effective with a certain kind of property, and that needs to continue. But it's an opportunity to do much more for all the other 70% of properties that don't sell. There's an opportunity to think collaboratively across government units, with neighborhoods, with other resources that are here locally, and say, what could we do with this moment, this special moment in time of intervention? Okay. Just to mention, yeah, we have a bunch more research. We recognize that this is not a complete study, and there's lots of work to be done. And we hope to be digging into some of these in the future. Any questions? Yeah.
Man, I love what you guys are doing with the Old West End, like trying to revitalize that area. The thing, like from my experience, is I'm not like into the tax sale either, and I would love to like get in on that and like make like money and opportunity through it. But neighborhoods like the Old West End, the tax sale has failed over and over and over again. And I had an investor that wanted me to do some work. Like this was like 8 years ago. He bought like 3 houses in the Old West End, sat for years because it was going to take so much money to rehab them that the ARV wasn't even going to be worth it.
Yeah.
And the longer they sat, the more they got dilapidated and messed up. And then he ended up pretty much begging someone to take those houses off his hands so he could even come close to breaking even. He lost money. And like that's a neighborhood that's like, why would we not invest in like trying to connect downtown to like Ball State?
Yeah.
And like neighborhoods that the tax sale fell.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I love your guys' like,
I appreciate it.
what you guys are trying to do, because like that's something that's going to benefit our community.
Yeah.
And the Old West End, like, it's an awesome neighborhood.
Yeah.
Like, my best friend grew up there now. I spent so much time growing up there and stuff. And it's like, there's no reason that shouldn't be like next for Muncie.
Yeah.
And like, in places like that, where the tax sale is like, doesn't work. Because the top like 5% is buyers. Like, they're not like, they don't care about money. They just care about like making money either on that interest or and they're buying properties